At the end of the Second World War, it was during the era of anti-colonial struggle. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, a renowned nationalist of the Ghanaian Republic, was of the opinion that African leaders should seek first political kingdom and definitely every other things will be added onto it. Nigerian nationalists, the likes of Nnamdi Azikiwe, Obafemi Awolowo, Tafawa Balewa, just to mention a few, Herbert Macaulay, and the list is endless, heeded this clarion call and fought for independence. Hence the emergence of Nigeria in 1960. So as at 1914, the Southern and the Northern Protectorates were actually brought together to come together to form modern-day Nigeria. And as we speak now, currently, Nigeria now, upon emergence of independence from the British in 1960, had endured or enjoyed political prosperity, social prosperity, and economic prosperity. But in the long run, have we actually lived up to these expectations? That is the question we need to call or ask. Because as we speak, we currently have internal colonizers definitely taking over the whole country to their selfish gains, not living up to the actual ideology in which the nationalists, the likes of Nnamdi Azikiwe, Obafemi Awolowo, fought for. Just to mention a few also like Tafawa Balewa and also Herbert Macaulay, Ahmadu Bello, just to mention the list, which is moving on. The Giant at 63, which is the poster which I said earlier on concerning this important documentary which we talk about. To numerous political examiners, a few African nations that acquired independence that very year as Nigeria have also gone far ahead regarding economic and social turn of events, notwithstanding the way out the nation was once called or alluded the Giant of Africa. We could see the likes of South Africa, we could see the likes of Kenya, we could see the likes of Ethiopia. These nations are actually doing very, very well politically, economically, socially, just to mention a few. Culturally, it is a massive export when it comes to like Kenya, and just to mention the Maasai tribes in East Africa. But Nigeria has refused to explore this venture. We have diverse cultural, indigenous, and sectors within this part of the world. We have the TV, we have the Hausas, we have the Fulanis, we have the Ibibios, we have the Yorubas, we have the Igbos. But yet still inside this diversity, I believe, in my own view and our opinion, that we can also live comfortably. But because of bias, sentiments, and sectarian practices, we have definitely allowed ourselves to be porous enough to allow this seed of discord to be sown inside us by internal colonizers. How well have we gone far, or how did we even miss it, not even learning the lessons of prosperity from the British who actually granted us independence? Precisely, some African nations that got independence that very year, as of today, are definitely doing well. They are way by far more advanced than we are. All the year round, we will not deviate from the fact that the Nigerian country has had a checkered history. When I mean a checkered history, I'm talking about a switch from military rule to democratic rule. As we speak currently, we're in the Fourth Republic. The First Republic, which was actually initiated 3 years after independence as of 1963, was upturned by the military, bringing in Aguiyi Ironsi, who was assassinated and taken over by Gowon. And thereon, it continued like that. Thereafter, the Second Republic came on board, bringing in Shagari, who was also ousted out of office by IBB, Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. Now, this same government also continued, where he brought in an interim government by who? Ernest Shoneko. Ernest Shoneko now was actually booted out of office by the Buhari regime, the Buhari Idi Agbon regime. Now, the Buhari Idi Agbon regime was actually ousted out of office through a coup also, a military takeover, by the General Sani Abacha, who died June 8, 1998. As we speak, Abdulsalami took over and comfortably and conveniently handed over power again back to the civilians. A majority rule system of government which as we speak now is the Fourth Republic and has thereon been existent since 1999 up until 2023. I think that has been the most healthy form of democracy we've had in a long period of time. Now, during this military rule, we had seen cases of insecurity, looting, mishaps, particularly in the political scene, the economic scene, and the social scene. The media on its own part had its own fair share of the whole quagmire. We remember the likes of Delegiwa, who was actually served with a letter bomb, if we go down memory lane. Going on further, now insecurity and instability has been the order of the day. While some keep praying and making sure that the country Nigeria will always or is getting better, or in local parlance as they put it, it go better, it go better, it go better. But we've been hearing that for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades. Now the country now is in its 60s. So I want to believe definitely the older and younger generation, even the Generation Z who are now here, have been hearing that for 6 decades going. The country is going to turn 63 on the 1st of October, 2023. How well have we gone? How far have we gone? And how did we miss it? Looking at the present circumstance surrounding the country. As we speak now, industrialization now has become a far cry. Why? Because as we speak, the blue chip companies are being churned out, or they are packing bag and baggages, leaving the country, thereby leaving a citizenry unemployed. And when the citizen, which is a warehouse, Nigeria is not just called a giant of Africa for fun. One of the particular reasons why the country is being called the giant of Africa is because of its large population size. Now, with this large population size, we could borrow or take a cue from India. We could also take a cue from China. Now, when we see these countries, we know that yes, they actually have that population size. But you know one characteristic thing about both countries, they've actually been able to use their population to their own advantage. It should be a warehouse for human resources to serve us in the military, in the Navy, in the Air Force, in the medical corps, the law aspects of, or the legal arm of the country, name it anywhere. Now, this large population now has actually now been put to use for ill means, particularly those who are uneducated. That is why the educational sector also on its own part is being crippled. Why? Because once you are enlightened, you are able to know, and once you don't know, you become ignorant. But yet still, ignorance is no excuse in the sight of the law. Moving on, we will now begin to say, falling back on what I said earlier on, whereby individuals keep praying that the country will still get better, but yet still, it still keeps becoming toxic. The climate in Nigeria, the Nigerian climate actually has become toxic to serve its population. We have industries like the likes of, recently GlaxoSmithKline left the giant of Africa. Dunlop once upon a time was in the giant of Africa. Michelin, Peugeot, Volkswagen all had their assembling plants in the giant of Africa. But as we speak now, the instability from the political scene, the insecurity in the educational sector, the insecurity in jobs, in the job aspect, has also made these people to pack bag and baggage and begin to evacuate. From the beginning, nothing remains to be grinned about, which I said earlier on. There are people who are actually praying for the country to be good, but there are people who have made up their mind, or by may say in local parlance, they don't put their mind for back. There's nothing to smile about in this country. We are combating insecurity, political instability, with an expected populace of more than 220 million individuals. The nation is ravaged by insurgency. It isn't just troubling that Nigeria is one of the most risky spots to live and work, given the impact of the crisis. The World Bank has projected the destitution headcount to hop from 42.0% to 42.6%, suggesting that the quantity of needy individuals was 89.0 million and would be 95.1 million subsequent years after this fact. The likelihood of coordinated conflicts, political terror, vicious demonstrations, and fierce crimes occurring in Nigeria has been fixed at 90%. Now, for that to be fixed at 90%, the crimes occurring or taking place in Nigeria to be fixed at 90%, that is a red light zone. a danger zone, meaning that it's a no-go area for global experts or global institutions to come and invest. Why? Because the environment has been regarded as toxic. Now, these issues now that have actually influenced the mishaps within the country, we could start from the coups, the civil wars, the military takeovers, and the hostile takeovers by the military within the military. Those are the counter coups we are talking about. We have the Niger Delta militancy. Of course, the Niger Delta militancy, or to begin with, the coups have actually been coming on board. Why? Because of a dissatisfaction by the military over previous republics. There was a lot of lootings. If I may borrow a slang or a song from the world-renowned fella Nicola Bokuti, he said, we have ITTs, international thief. Now, this is a psyche that actually, this is a mentality that was like seen or perceived by the military and said, this is not the way to go about things. And the military, with a command orientation, came in to actually adjust the system. But coming in with that kind of mentality to address a civilian system of government, it is not actually okay, because dictatorship, tyranny, or authoritarianism is not always advised in any form of rule. Hence, the emergence of a majority rule of government. Now, these coups and counter coups have also had its fair share within the country, whereby we have a particular tribe ruling and the other tribes are dissatisfied. Why? Because they are not adequately represented, hence the federal character. Now, the emergence of the federal character by Obasanjo, as at when he was a military ruler on the country, actually salvaged the situation of marginalization of minority groups, which was actually something that had actually been eaten in deep as a cankerworm or cancer within the military. Moving on to the Niger Delta militancy. Now, this is a group in the South region that has actually been fighting justifiably, but I think that the approach has been wrong all the while. When you have your earthly father and you demand your pocket money, you don't go raising your voices at him. If not, he's not going to listen to you. But I think we should embrace dialogue. But what happens when dialogue is on the table and even the person who is being presented dialogue to is not ready to even grant you listening ears? Hence the showcasing of ignorance and busting of pipelines left, right, and center all over the South region, particularly Edo, Delta, Bayelsa, Rivers, just to mention a few, encompassing the South region. Now, this militancy had been on since the early 90s, demanding that the resources garnered from that region also reflect on that area. I mean, the Niger Delta region is a waterside area. It could be like Venice of Italy, but unfortunately or sadly, resources or funds in particular gathered from all those parts of the region actually into the pockets of selfish individuals, and then they end up drinking water which is actually, poisoned with all sorts of crude chemicals from our oil producing regions. It's sad, it's appalling, and we seek redress concerning this. Now, this documentary video, The Giants at 63, is not just to point accusing fingers at anyone, but rather a spotlight should be shed into us, and we need to look inward. Where did we get it wrong, and how can we correct it, and how can we make it right? Moving on from the Niger Delta, we move over to another region which actually engaged in the Civil War in 1967 to 1970. For 3 years, the southeastern part of Nigeria was torn into bits with the Civil War. Why? Because they felt they were marginalized. We talked about marginalization earlier on. Now, this region being marginalized, they thought they were not adequately represented either at the center to have a say in governmental issues, hence the emergence of the Republic of Biafra. Now, this fight went on for years, 3 years to be specific, with Ojukwu championing the cause of the Biafra, as at that time the then head of state was Gowon. Nigerians were practically slaughtered, as history will say. Dogs were actually feasting on dead bodies, as history will also say. Lives were lost, as history will say. Monuments were lost, as history will also say. Now, this Biafra had also metamorphosed to what they call Masob, movement for the actualization of the sovereign states of Biafra, and therefore or thereafter metamorphosed to IPOB, independent people of Biafra. Now, Biafra is not just, to me, a country that should emerge. I think it's an ideology that has actually been lost towards embracing dialogue to embrace independence. Because if we remember, both parties or both warring factors, the likes of Gawan and Ojukwu, were actually invited to the Aburi conference. But what happened to the outcome of that conference? Was it actually heeded to? That's another question, which we cannot even say or talk about now. Because new generation individuals, we should call them the Generation Z or the Jet Age, who were not actually born into the war, will not actually understand the consequences of the war. Moving on to the farmer header clashes. We will recall recently, just 5, 6, 7 years back, the farmer header clashes in the previous administration. How they invaded the southwestern farmlands with their cattle, and it began to cause a lot of mayhem. Why? Because people were being maimed, people were being kidnapped, and it became a total or utmost scare in the southwestern part of Nigeria. Hence the emergence of Amotekun to actually combat the excesses or checkmate the excesses of these farmer headers who are actually clashing with indigenes in this axis. Just to mention a few, the kidnapping for ransom. Kidnapping for ransom has been on starting from the kidnapping of expatriates in the South-South. Why? Because it had become a money-making venture, a business whereby, since the resources from our region is not actually utilized in our region, these expatriates should be held accountable. Hence the kidnap for ransom emergence. We could mention companies like likes of Shell, Mobil, who have also seen or had their own fair share of their staff being kidnapped by members of the militants as we speak. Now, these militants have metamorphosed from not just the militancy ideology alone, but have also given themselves a name they call the Niger Delta Avengers, which people began to liken them to the Marvel comic they call the Avengers. Actually, they are actually fighting for a justifiable cause. Moving on to the 2020 incidents.